Going on? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show, DRF TV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forum's Twitter handle, at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forum's Facebook page. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter, at Bernier_Matt. This is the preview edition of the Matt Bernier Show, taking a look at some upcoming races from this weekend. That would be the weekend of August the 4th. Also going to look at the 3-year-old division as a whole, because there's a big race going on at Mountaineer Park on Saturday. We had some big 3-year-old races last weekend, and it just kind of feels like this whole thing is a little bit of a mishmash. We're trying to figure out who boss is of the division leading into a race like the Travers at the end of the Saratoga meeting. You listen to this thing podcast form, like most of you do. YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, click that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. You get all the latest from DRF TV. And then over on iTunes, leave us a nice little review, give us a positive rating, always greatly appreciated. Let's dive right into it. Again, I kind of just feel like this is a good time to discuss the 3-year-olds as a whole, because with the defection of Justify from the division, knowing that he is retired and he's on to bigger and better things as a stallion, it's left kind of a void. Or it did anyway, leading into last weekend. We talked about how Good Magic had an opportunity in a race like the Haskell, how Hofberg had an opportunity in a race like the Curling. Probably should have been running in the Jim Dandy. And then the Jim Dandy as a whole. It was a short field, but they had an opportunity to kind of show what they were capable of and if they actually belonged in the upper echelon as far as the 3-year-olds are concerned. You also found out that there was going to be a new name, a new addition, sort of a fresh face to the 3-year-old males anyway, going 10 furlongs. We'll touch on it all. First things first, let's go back and see what we had last weekend. On Sunday, it was all about Good Magic, and would he be able to regain that form that he had as a 2-year-old and even through the Triple Crown campaign? Guess what? He did so in very, very fine fashion. Frank Miramati with the stretch run of this year's Haskell Invitational.
Our beliefs, hugs the rail and is running a good one on the inside of Lone Sailor. There's an 1/8 of a mile to go, and Good Magic's clear by 4. Bravazzo and Honest second, but the champ is back. Good Magic, in a good-looking performance, cruises home in the Betfair.com Haskell Invitational under Jose Ortiz.
So Good Magic goes and does what he is supposed to do, looks good on the racetrack. The concern now, and the concern for me has always been a little bit about distance, but at the end of the day, it really boils down to if you strip Justify from the Kentucky Derby, Good Magic wins. Good Magic is the winner of the Derby if there is no Justify, and who knows what else he could have gone on to do. Saratoga, we'll find out. I don't think that's going to be much of an issue. He ran well enough in his career debut up at the Spa last year. The distance, I don't think it's ideal for him, but considering who he may be running up against, maybe he's just simply superior to everyone else, and he is in the best care with Chad Brown and Jose Ortiz. Now, on the flip side, you had a race like the Jim Dandy that was run the day prior up at Saratoga. Only a field of 5, and look, I'm going to be as kind as possible because you never know what could happen coming out of a race until they actually do return. But at face value, to me, it looked like a little bit of a dumpster fire, especially the stretch run. Larry Colmus with the stretch to this year's Jim Dandy.
As Tenfold ranges up alongside. Reride is trying to get involved too. Vino Rosso still well behind as they come to the final furlong, and Tenfold takes charge. Ricardo Santana Jr. and Tenfold have taken the lead, moving away from Flame Away. Vino Rosso kicking it in late. Tenfold is bearing out through the stretch, but Tenfold will win the Jim Dandy. Flame Away.
You see Tenfold take a right-hand turn. You see Vino Rosso running in spots. See Flame Away tired, really crawling down to the wire. To me, the Jim Dandy, I know it's the local prep for the Travers, but boy, it's hard to have a ton of confidence with any of those horses coming out of it, and I understand and I respect the folks that look at it and say, Vino Rosso, this was nothing more than a means to an end to get him ready for the 10 furlong race. When I see John Velasquez left-handed hitting Vino Rosso on the shoulder down the backside, kind of encouraging him, saying, we got to run, that to me is not a good sign, and that's been on par with what this horse has done basically for his entire career, his entire 3-year-old season anyway. I think he's talented. If he puts it together, he's certainly a player in the Travers, but I wouldn't be holding my breath waiting for him to actually do that, and I don't want to find out at a short price that he is or isn't going to. Tenfold is a little bit on the quirky side as well, because we've seen in the past he'll pop back to his left lead late in runs. We've also seen in a situation like this, he'll take a right-hand turn if he just decides to, if he feels like it. He's going to be hard to trust. He's going to need to move forward, and that's kind of the bigger piece about the Jim Dandy as a whole. It's already been clear. Mark Cassidy said Flame Away is not going. that race as a whole came back slow. 93 buyers for the first 3 finishers. That's not nearly fast enough to win a race like the Travers, especially at a longer distance. So you would have to need a horse like Vino Rosso to put it all together, appreciate the additional distance, which he should at face value, but also move forward in a significant way. Get up into that mid to high 90 range, even into a low 100, as far as a buyer is concerned, to be considered a real threat, because there was a race the day prior, working backwards with all the 3-year-old races from last weekend, that was run at Saratoga, restricted stakes race, and you had a big name in Hofburg. Now, that question became, one, why isn't Hofburg running in the Jim Dandy? But Bill Mott, I thought, laid it out pretty well. At the end of the day, they've thrown him to the Wolves considerable amount of times this year. Let's get a little bit of confidence back into him and take a step toward what the ultimate goal has always been, the Travers. But it was a wet track, and he still needed to do it at the end of the day. Here's the stretch run of this year's Curlin.
Side and Zing Zang comes wide. They're into the stretch, and it's Hofburg in front. Hofburg and Erad Ortiz come down to the 8th pole, pulling away from Nicodemus and Zing Zang, and it is Hofburg in complete control here. Nicodemus is 5 lengths behind as Hofburg cruises in the Curlin, and it's on to the Travers. Hofburg wins it by 4.5 lengths over Nicodemus.
Now, it was a wet track, but the way that he moved, I said I didn't really learn anything from him. I just learned he did what he was supposed to do. The question then was going to be what would happen in the Jim Dandy, what would happen in the Haskell. Now, in hindsight, looking back a week later, the 100 buyer that Hofburg has earned and the way that he runs and the idea of him at 10 furlongs, the question comes down to, of those two, who do you think goes off favored in a race like the Travers? Because the favorite won't come out of the Jim Dandy. That's a fact. And we'll talk about the 3-year-old race coming up this weekend that I have a hard time imagining the favorite would be emerging from this race that we'll speak of. So really, I think it boils down to, do you think Hofburg or do you think Good Magic end up being the favorite come post time? Unless you think the sort of surprise entrant in the Travers pie is the one that could actually take more money for whatever storyline you want it to be, and that's Wonder Godot. Wonder Godot was visually impressive winning up at Fort Erie in the Prince of Wales. She was very impressive winning the Queen's Plate. Those 2 races coincided with the first 2 times that she has had blinkers on, and she has turned into a different animal, and we have seen so many times in the past that all it takes is a little bit of an equipment change for horses to take a step forward and jump up and really run to their full potential. 10 furlongs is her game. Mark Casse has said that. The ownership group has said that. The question now becomes, do you think she is fast enough to run with the boys? Based on what we have seen so far, what looked like a very strong group of 3-year-olds leading in throughout the Derby, now I think you can poke holes in many of them with the exception of the 2 I spoke of, Hofburg and Good Magic. Good Magic, can he run fast enough at 10 furlongs? Now the good news for him, tactically, he's probably going to have an advantage over the others. Wonder Godot, can she transfer, I should say, that form that she has had up in Canada over to a track like Saratoga, to a competition littered with boys, and I know she's been beating the boys in her past 2 races, but we're talking about a different level of competition now. And can she do it really when she's arguably going to be one of the choices in there? And then you have Hofburg. Can he do it on a fast main strip run the way that he did in the Curlin? Can he do it against better horses? And how far back is he going to be? Because tactically, he could be way up against it. He may be the fastest of them all right now, but he's going to be coming from a little bit farther out of it, and that's got to be a little bit of a concern if you're a fan of this horse at what's likely to be a short price in the 2-1, 5-2 range if I'm just projecting going forward. I thought it was a good time to touch on that because there was a big 3-year-old race this weekend. We'll find out what happens down at Mountaineer Park and if any sort of substantial horses are going to exit that and go into the Travers. But the way it looks right now, you're looking at 3 horses right now for the Midsummer Derby up at the Spa. You're looking at Haskell champion and reigning 2-year-old champion, Good Magic. You're looking at Hofburg, highly thought of horse for Bill Mott. You're looking at Wonder Godot for Mark Casse, the filly taking on the boys. A lot can change between now and then. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't very interested in Wonder Godot, considering I think she's probably going to be the longest price of the 3 of them. And she at least has shown a little bit of versatility as she did in that run-up at Fort Erie. Long way to go, though. First things first, let's find out if there are any other 3-year-olds that will emerge, specifically from this race coming up this weekend. Let's talk about the West Virginia Derby. Historically, in the grand scheme of things, for 3-year-olds, this has not been the most important race, but at the end of the day, it's been a productive race, and there have been some nice horses that have gone through this path. The field for the Grade 3 West Virginia Derby at Mountaineer Park on Saturday afternoon, scheduled post is 5:35 Eastern. You've got a nice field assembled of 9. I don't know that there are any superstars in here, but it is worth noting you've got big connections in here, specifically coming in from Southern California. Bob Baffert has an entrant. Peter Urton has an entrant. Those are the top 2 finishers that were separated by a head in this year's Los Alamitos Derby. The number 2 is Draft Pick, and the number 5 is Once on Whiskey. Let's first start with Once on Whiskey. Once on Whiskey is the kind of horse that you never knew until they fully stretched him out to find out if he could handle going 2 turns, or was he going to be that sort of late-running, closing sprinter. On the flip side, you had a horse like Draft Pick, who we know what he's capable of. He had won the Affirmed 2 starts back out at Santa Anita. 2 turns felt like it was going to be his thing, and really, you go through, I'm not going to hold the race against core beliefs against him. You know what he turned into eventually. He broke his maiden against a subpar group, but he had faced some decent horses. Go back to that second lifetime start. He runs into a horse like Instilled Regard, who was 4th in the Kentucky Derby, and eventually will be making his first start for Chad at some point. So the question going into the Los Al Derby was more a matter of, do you like the proven commodity and Draft Pick, or do you want to try with an up-and-comer? We're going to take a look at the stretch run of the Los Al Derby right now, and I think the thing that's most important to recognize, the running style of the 2 horses. Draft Pick was the one up there prompting the pace, and on the flip side, you had Once on Whiskey taken back, sitting comfortably, and coming in and sustaining a nice bid. I like the way that each one of them finished. It gives me the impression that really, at the end of the day, they're both going to be pretty darn good at this distance. The question becomes, in a race like this on Saturday, from a wagering standpoint, they don't have any sort of tremendous edge on this field. I understand Draft Pick did earn that 92 buyer 2 starts back, but they both earned mid-80 buyers in that Los Al Derby. And considering they're both going to be, look, they're the class of the field, there's no question about it, but considering they're going to be heavily betting here, going to be the first and second choice, I'd be stunned if anyone else was vying for that. Really, they're going to be the sort of barometer where you need to make a decision as a handicapper. Do you want to take that short price on a horse that numbers doesn't really have any sort of edge? Or do you want to just look at it and say, you know what, there are some other intriguing alternatives? We've gone through and done the full stakes preview. You can find that over on video.drf.com or the Daily Racing Forms YouTube channel. Really, I kind of look at this race and say, I like the Los Al horses. I don't love them. I don't love the Iowa Derby horses, but I understand why they make sense. That's ultimately why I landed on Lionite. Spoiler alert. But this is a race to me where it's more a matter of whomever it is anyone going to take a giant step forward? Is anyone going to be a legitimate sort of threat in a race like the Travers in a few weeks? Because right now, going into it, it doesn't feel like it, but there are horses that are lightly raced enough, whether it is a Draft Pick, whether it is a Once on Whiskey, whether it is any of these other horses. And Mr. Freeze might be one of the more intriguing candidates in this spot, whether it's a Rugby Man or even a High North on the far outside for Brad Cox. Are any of these horses going to run well enough? And I'm not even suggesting multiple. I'm just saying one. Is anyone going to run fast enough? Are they going to take a step forward, the necessary step forward, to actually be considered a factor against those horses I spoke of in the intro? Against the Good Magics, against the Wonder Godots, against the Hofburgs of the world. Because if they don't take a step forward, it's going to be very difficult for them to even be considered fringe contenders in a race like the Travers. I think the Southern California contingent is solid. I'd like to see what we're going to get. Baffert sending a horse out to West Virginia. He's done it once in the past 5 years. Did it with Cupid. He won that race. Usually when Baffert ships, there's a reason. Flavian Pratt goes. I think that's something that you should be taking note of as well. Once on Whiskey, again, this 3-year-old division, outside of those top 3, it's a little bit turbulent. You get a horse like Once on Whiskey, you get a horse like Draft Pick. If they show up and they come through with a big effort on Saturday, now all of a sudden they become interesting alternatives. But as is constituted right now from a speed figure standpoint, they are not fast enough to run with the likes of those big 3. And I'll call them the big 3 for right now because, again, there's a lot of things that can happen between now and the end of August. But it sounds like those are the 3. They're going to be the ones that most people are going to gravitate toward in a race like the Travers. And ultimately in the 3-year-old division going forward. Perhaps it is a horse like Mr. Freeze, who has only gone out 3 times. He's never been out of the exacta. Perhaps it is a High North who finally, he's always hinted at some ability, but he's really never gotten that much faster. Maybe it is a horse like Lionite. but I have a sneaky feeling he'll be better going slightly shorter. I know I picked him here, but I'm terrified of the distance. Or maybe it is the logical horses, the draft picks, and the once on whiskeys of the world. I'm going to go with Lionite in this spot, but I am most intrigued with the 2 California shippers, or anyone for that matter. Are you going to take a step forward and really show that you belong with the cream of the crop? Or are you content being sort of second rung, second tier? Maybe a rugby man. Who knows? We'll find out what happens. But to me, it's one of the more intriguing races of the weekend, not because of the race itself, but because of what could happen and what these horses could turn into a few weeks from now. Let's go over to Saratoga. We'll take a brief look, rip through that all-stakes pick 4 on Saturday afternoon. Button things up here with a little bit of a different spin on things. We'll take a look at the all-stakes pick 4 sequence at Saratoga, and I'm not going to give out specific picks because I still have some work to do, admittedly. It's just that's this time of year where there's 10 pounds of you-know-what packed into a 5-pound bag. But there are talking points, really, for all 4 of these races, and I find it particularly interesting with a couple of the calls and where some of these horses are running on Saturday as opposed to other spots going on down the road. Let's start off with race 8. This is going to be the kickoff leg of that pick 4 sequence. It's a grade 1. It's the test. You've got 3-year-old fillies going 7/8 of a mile. You can go a few different ways. Chad has separation of powers in here. She's won at Saratoga in the past. She had no chance in the victory ride given the way that whole thing played out with her stumbling as badly as she did at the start. She did have a good pace to run at, and it was an encouraging enough return off of a long layoff. But now you've got to deal with some other better competition, in my opinion anyway. And you also have to make a decision. What kind of running style is she going to employ here? Because with the other speed in here, she's been a horse that usually is forwardly placed when she runs her best. But you've got horses like Classy Act. You've got horses like Mia Mischief. You've got Minute to Stardom. They're all going to be forwardly placed. How close is separation of powers going to be, or is she going to come from a little bit farther off of it? You have a horse like Minute to Stardom, who is a total unknown for Al Stall. Al Stall usually only ships when there's a reason to ship. This filly, she looks like she's done nothing wrong. She's never, the smallest margin of victory for her has been 5 1/4 lengths in 3 lifetime starts. She's going to be forwardly placed, and she's going to get the acid test this time around, but what she's done on the track so far, hard to argue with. Maybe she's interesting as an alternative at what should be a decent enough price. Kelly's Humor is a horse that I've always been interested in, and this is what she wants to do. I'm a sucker for a turn back, and her races historically through her 9-race career, considerably better going 1 turn as opposed to 2 turns and stretching out. Didn't run that well in the Indiana Oaks most recently, well beaten by Talk Vuv to me, and I had made mention way back when. I thought they should have wheeled Talk Vuv to me back. Now perhaps there's some more story there that I'm unaware of, but I would have run her here in this spot. Nonetheless, Kelly's Humor should get some pace to run at, and this is probably a more beneficial sort of situation for her 1 turn, 7/8 of a mile. Spectator, is she going to finally put it together? Second start here in New York for Michelle Nevin. Alter Moon, privately purchased. Not privately purchased, she went through the auction ring, excuse me. But the idea that she's really turned the corner. Now she goes into Chad Brown's barn. You get Javier aboard. Wonder if she's a little bit of a wise guy horse in a spot like this. Going to take plenty of money. The first race is very, very interesting in this pick 4 sequence. I don't know right now that I have a super strong opinion. Probably going to be a spread race for me. But, again, I admittedly have a little bit more work to do on that. Race number 9 is the Grade 1 Whitney. This race boils down to a few different things. The presence of Diversify. Is he going to be able to get out there and walk on the front end? Or is a horse like Dalmore going to keep him company? His most recent start was off the charts good in the Suburban. That was 10 furlongs, arguably the best race of his career. This race was not part of the plan for Rick Violet. They'd planned on going and waiting for the Woodward. You know he likes Saratoga. You know he probably prefers 9 furlongs over 10 furlongs. I usually view it as a positive. If you're going to wheel a horse back and you didn't plan on it, but they're doing so well, I usually look at it as a good thing. If you got a good horse, run them, and if they're feeling well. But admittedly, this is a little bit of an unknown here, because when you veer too much off of what the plan was, I think you got to at least just throw that in the back of your mind. Maybe the best horse in the race is Mind Your Biscuits. Question now becomes, Mind Your Biscuits in start number 23 is going to go 2 turns for the first time. And I think Mike Watchmaker in the Weekend Warrior segment we did put it very, 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 very well. He's very good, and he deserves to be one of the favorites. I don't personally want to bet on a horse at a short price doing something for the first time at a track that last year he didn't run well at. I think he is arguably the best horse in the race, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's a scenario where he just doesn't quite get over the hump and maybe he flattens out down the lane. We'll find out. But who knows? Maybe I end up picking him. But right now, just from a pick 4 standpoint, from a value standpoint, he's one you have to use, but I don't know if you want to put all your eggs into his basket. We've got other interesting runners in here. Backyard Heaven. What the hell happened to Stephen Foster? He went from 0 to 100, or 100 to 0. 0 to 100 would have been pretty good. 100 to 0, not so good. He looked like he was ready to roll, and he just completely stopped. Chad said maybe it was the weather, maybe it was the humidity. Well, you're probably going to get most of that at Saratoga on Saturday as well. Perhaps it's a positive that they trudge on with him. I wasn't sold on his ability to get 9 furlongs in the Foster. That was before he dropped anchor on the far turn. He popped back to his left lead at the end of that alley Sheba, and it just makes me wonder, is this 1 1/8 too much for him? Then you got to start making some sideways cases for some of these horses if you're trying to go past that. Discreet Lover, always been a fan, not sure he's good enough. You look at a horse like Good Samaritan. His best run is good enough to win in a spot like this, but we haven't seen his best in quite some time. McCracken, I don't think he's this good, and I don't think this distance is really what he wants. After that, you're left with a horse like Tapwrit. Tapwrit, I've never been a huge fan of, but he's warming up. I'm warming up to him a little bit more and more. Got to go back, watch a little bit more tape. Saratoga, he hasn't run great at, but at the end of the day, how many real opportunities has he had? He debuted here. He wants to go longer than that. And then in the Travers last year, he didn't run poorly. Wasn't a terrible effort from him. Maybe Tapwrit all of a sudden third start off the layoff for Todd. Maybe he's rounding into form. Who knows? We'll move on to race number 10. That's the Weah. This is one of those races. It always feels like you've got a horse in here that makes a lot of sense on paper, but at the end of the day, from a betting standpoint, do you really want to hitch your wagon to her? I look at Mom's on Strike. I think she's good. Distance-wise, is this really what she wants? I know she's 1 for 1 at it, but I kind of have always felt she's made it maybe better a little bit shorter, 1 1/8, 1 3/16 as opposed to 1.5 miles. Santa Monica for Chad. Thought she was awesome winning that race in the Dance Smartly, but to be honest, I thought Inflexibility, her uncoupled stablemate, actually ran the better race. So do I really want to take a horse like Santa Monica out of a race that I don't even think she was necessarily the best in when she's going to be 6 to 5 in here? You got a totally fresh face coming in from Michael Bell. Queen of Connaught. Javier's intrigued enough to ride. Time form rating over there, pre-Lasix, and I'm not convinced that this horse is going to get Lasix. A little bit slow, but my goodness, we have seen much worse come over from Europe and do very, very well here in the States. Perhaps Queen of Connaught is a prime example of that sort of situation. Somersault. Always has felt like a horse that if she could just put it together and mind her P's and Q's, she would be very, very good. The problem is she very rarely does that. And I know she has won 7 times throughout her career. But from a figure standpoint at this point in her career, I wonder if she's just a little bit slow. And again, she's a little bit of her own worst enemy. Sometimes she doesn't come forth with a big enough effort. At the end of the day, she is nice here at Saratoga. And then you've got Lottie on the far outside for Graham Motion. Lottie's the kind of horse, when you go through and look at her page, ever since they have tested her and moved her up into the stakes company. She won that N1X at Belmont last year at 1 3/8. Then all of a sudden you have a half-length defeat in the River Memories, a half-length defeat in the Weah, beaten by 6, beaten by 4 3/4, beaten by 4 1/2, and then the Sheepshead Bay beaten by a half-length. She fits very nicely on figures. She is incredibly difficult to trust at 2 for 15 lifetime and 7 times second or third. Not suggesting she can't win, but boy, she's a tough one to trust. Then you get to the payoff leg of this thing if you're still alive. You get the Lure. It's a restricted stakes race. The big piece in here for me that I wanted to touch on is Voodoo Song. Now, I made mention when we went back and we reviewed the Forbidden Apple. As awesome as he was that day, considering he got away with an easier lead than he had in the poker, but I loved him in the poker. Thought it was a giant effort for him to finish third, only beaten by less than 3 lengths. The Forbidden Apple, I said, you've got a horse that is razor sharp. At the time, I said, world approval. Who knows what version of him you're going to get. Come to find out, you're not even going to get him in that race. Voodoo Song would arguably be the favorite in the 4-Star Dave next weekend. Why is he here? I understand the connections like to win and place the horses where they think they can win. How often are you arguably a favorite or a second choice in a Grade 1 event? He's going to be the favorite in here, but this is no walkover. There are some other talented runners in here. Bala Rocks is in here. Inspector Lindley on his best day can come with a decent bid. It's fascinating to me to see him here as opposed to the 4-Star Dave next weekend. And maybe they'll choose otherwise. Maybe they'll scratch from this spot on Saturday and ultimately wait to run him next weekend. I look at it and how often are you going to get the opportunity to have arguably the favorite in a race in a grade 1, and instead you choose for what in theory is a lesser spot? It's just surprising to me. Voodoo Song, he makes all the sense in the world, no question about it. I find it curious that this is the spot that he shows up in, not waiting till next week for a race at the 4-star Dave. Again, I apologize for no specific picks this time around, just more some ideas overall from that pick 4 sequence. Still have a little bit of work to do. If you've been listening to this live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forums Twitter handle, at DRF Inside Post, or the Daily Racing Forums Facebook page, thank you for doing so. If you listen to a podcast, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, and Spotify. If you listen on YouTube, click that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. You get all the latest offerings from DRF TV. iTunes, write us a review, give us a positive rating. Greatly appreciated. I will be back at the beginning of next week with the recap edition of the Matt Bernier Show. We'll dive into the Whitney. We'll dive into the test. We'll dive into some other graded stakes action. You got the Yellow Ribbon out at Del Mar on Saturday afternoon. That's a fun race on the turf for the ladies. Got plenty of good things going on. If you've been listening live, you've already listened to the DRF Players Podcast with Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin. As we always do with the preview edition, we're going to roll it into the latest edition out of the gate with all the usual suspects, go over a few graded stakes races, hopefully get you some best bets, some winners out there for the weekend, wherever you decide to watch this weekend and play this weekend. Best of luck, wherever, however, whatever you're playing. This has been the preview edition of the Matt Bernier Show.